So welcome back to International School History Teacher and this series of lessons looking at the rise, consolidation and rule of authoritarian states. In our last lesson we considered the underlying structural conditions which give rise to authoritarian states. Today I want to consider an additional factor that was particularly important to the emergence of the very first modern authoritarian states: war.
Follow me!
War is an important condition to the emergence of authoritarian states because it has a tendency to exacerbate the other political, economic, social and cultural factors that we looked at in our previous lesson. War has an impact on the socio-economic ability of a state to function effectively. Total war in the early 20th century engaged whole societies and economies in ways that had been previously unimaginable. All states in total war struggle to feed, house and protect the civilian population, which has been deliberately targeted by enemy military strategy. In addition, wartime and post-war economies struggle to adapt to the changed demands. Economic dislocation results in unemployment or shortages in consumer goods. It is hard to maintain the consent of the governed if the state is unable to provide what it is supposed to provide. War has an impact on the political system itself. In brief, all states that fight wars have to become more authoritarian if they are to win. Even the most liberal democracy has to centralize control over the economy, society and culture. It nationalizes industry, conscripts civilians, controls the media, in ways that would be simply unacceptable in times of peace. The experience of war has a significant impact on culture. The experience of war transforms human beings, and in total war this can mean almost the whole of society is subject to that transformation. For democracy to be effective, there must be a culture of toleration, compromise, open, rational debate, a peaceful social interaction that revolves around the participation of individuals who respect each other's human rights. War produces just the opposite condition. War needs individuals to give up the free pursuit of their own ambitions for the good of the group, of the community, of the nation, of the fatherland. It is the emotions of patriotism and the hatred of the other, not reason and empathy, that are the most welcome characteristics in wartime. And for those who actually do the fighting and the killing, there are the long-term effects of trauma, dehumanization and military comradeship, which can make it very difficult to readjust to peacetime conditions and civilian authority.
The young returning home, proud of having fought with honour, many with their brave bodies wounded, were downcast and alone, shoved aside as if guilty. This cry of anguish was heard by a man who was worthy of it, by Benito Mussolini.
And finally, we need to acknowledge the simple fact that authoritarian states are regularly created in the aftermath of wars, civil wars and coup d'etat, where the role of the military has been essential to the successful creation of an authoritarian regime. The existence of a sympathetic section of the army or a well-armed civilian population is often essential to the revolutionary capture of the state, and this militarized state is most commonly found in time of war. When the new regime is established, it will naturally retain some of the characteristics of its foundation. Militaristic cultural values such as loyalty and discipline and respect for military authority and for military leaders who are reluctant to hand over authority to civilian leaders. These are the sorts of characteristics we can expect to find in these military authoritarian states.
A sizable part of Europe was living a climate virtually of civil war after 1918. This was true throughout Central Europe, was true throughout most of Eastern Europe as well, and this kind of climate of civil war encouraged political violence.
It is no coincidence that established authoritarian states continue to perpetuate wars against the enemy within, as well as the external threats from abroad. The kulaks in Russia, the Jews in Germany, even the older generation in China in 1966, which is another example of social division. These provide the state with a justification for the continued war footing that is an essential characteristic of authoritarian rule. In George Orwell's 1984, the main character, Winston, could not, and I quote, definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war. In fact, there is a state of perpetual war between the nations of Oceania, Eastasia and Eurasia. Perpetual war justifies every citizen's sacrifice, every restriction of liberty, and every encouragement to hate.
The dark, murdering armies of Eurasia. In the barren deserts of Africa and India, on the oceans of Australasia, courage, strength, and youth are sacrificed. Sacrificed to barbarians whose only honor is atrocity.
The First World War was central to the rise of the first modern authoritarian states. The late 19th and early 20th century had been a time of enormous optimism. The Belle Epoque, which had been characterized by the collapse of traditional authoritarian regimes and the rise of liberal democracy. The First World War ended that optimism and gave rise to fascism and communism, two modern totalitarian models that stood as rivals to liberal democracy. Of the 11 European states that were still democracies at the outbreak of the Second World War, all had either been neutral or on the winning side of the First World War. So the experience of total war was important in helping the rise of authoritarianism, but defeat in war was even more important. In the next lesson, we'll examine the role of the historical agents who were transformed by their experience of war and who, through their actions, helped to bring about modern authoritarianism. More next time.
Architecture of